Hi, and welcome to the topic on religion. We're going to look at the study of religion, and particularly the study of religion based on a sociological study. And then further to that, we're going to look at the perspectives, and this is where we're looking at functionalism, conflict, symbolic, feminist, and postmodern. And then we're going to look at what would be the trends in religion in Canada currently, and what can we imagine might be some of those trends in the future. We'll just touch on that. So when you're thinking about religion, we're not going to be looking at it from the perspective of how you and I might just chat about it at a coffee shop or something like that. We're going to take a very sociological perspective, and like a lot of topics in sociology, it's about stepping back and sort of taking a big picture view and not making any value statements, kind of like when we did the sociological imagination at the very beginning, being able to step back. So some questions you could be asking yourself while you go through the video and while you go through the chapter is, what is the relationship between society and religion? Now, as I mentioned before, like education, like politics, religion is a social institution. It's an organization, a group of people that have been long time standing in Canadian society, but also around the world. And because of that, it has an impact on society and has an impact on individuals, and individuals have an impact on it. And so what role does religion play in people's everyday life? What are some of the key components of religion? We'll touch on that too. How do functionalists, conflict, feminists, symbolic interactionists, and postmodernists, how do their perspectives differ when it looks at religion and its role in society? What are some of the central beliefs of the world's religions? We're just going to touch on some of these, and a lot of this is somewhat in your text, but it's just, because this is an introductory psychology, we can't go into a great deal of depth because sociology studies these topics in greater depth, almost as an individual social science. So we're only sort of highlighting some of the key points. And then lastly, we touch base on the future of religion in Canada. So what is the future of religion in Canada? And we'll just again sort of touch on that. So I hope you're doing well. The sociological study of religion, let's look at some of the terms that we'll need to be exploring. And one will be about religion. Now, by definition, religion is a system of beliefs, symbols, and rituals based on some sacred or supernatural realm. Now, this guides human behavior, giving some meaning to life, and unites believers into a community. Now, this is the definition by Durkheim. Now, a little more current definition, and this is the second definition, and this is a little more inclusive of all dimensions of religions, and this is the definition, the second one. The individual and social experience of a sacred manifested in mythology, in rituals, and ethos and integrated into the community or an organization. Now, for our purposes, what we're looking at is this sort of somewhat a combination of the two definitions, if you will. It's very much a social experience. It's very much based on beliefs, symbols, and rituals. If you think of, if you are a religious person, and some of the traditions and rituals in which you experience maybe you go to church every Sunday, and as a result you sing certain songs, you have certain prayers, you go through a certain procedure in the service. And those are all parts of rituals in use of symbols and in the strengthening of beliefs. And this is all integrated into the community, into organizations, into your life, and into the lives of people around you. So how can sociologists study us? How do you put a magnifying glass on religion to study it from a sociological perspective? With an endeavor not to make any value statements, not to make any truth claims on any religion is the sociological perspective. The goal is to look at the effect of religion using methods like historical analysis, experimentation, participant observation, survey research, and content analysis. Now, those are all typical social science methodologies to gather information. The focus is on tangible elements such as written text, patterns of behavior or opinions that can be studied using standard sociological research tools. Now, if we explore sociology of religion, now this is not theology. Scholars who believe or who study their traditions, sociology does not ask the question such as, what is the nature of God? Will you go to heaven? It is not value-based. It's not making any decision about the rights and the wrongs, the goods and the bads, the valued and devalued. Okay. Now, if we look at the religious beliefs and rituals, there are some elements we should be aware of. Faith, well, this is the unquestioning belief that does not require proof or scientific evidence. It answers some purposes of life. It gives some purpose to life, what happens to us after death. And this is what we would fall within with what we call faith. Now, sacredness, or the sacred, Durkheim looked at this as being excuse me, that which refers to those aspects of life that are extraordinary or supernatural. You could also covet that under holy. People respect and have reverence for the sacred. Now, rituals, on the other hand, these are things that we see in all religions. They're regularly repeated and carefully prescribed forms of behavior that symbolize cherished values and beliefs. They could be songs, prayers, worship services. All sorts of things fall within the rituals. And we've all, if we are in any way religious, no matter what our religion, there are rituals that bind us and further enhance our belief systems. Now, there are categories of different religions, and then you may find some of this if you've been in any sort of perspective of history. When we look at categories of religion, one of the first ones we can consider is what's known as supernaturalism. And this is the belief that supernatural forces affect people's lives, positively or negatively, like the sunrise or thunderstorms, for good luck and bad. And you're seeing an image here of Stonehenge and the sunrise coming up through the winter solstice. And it was thought to bring good luck. And it was a predictable thing. And you see that today still people go there to do some sort of degree of celebration. Now, that's the first category. The second category is known as animism. This is the belief that plants, animals, or other elements of the natural world contain spiritual or life forces that have an impact on events in society. That animals somehow have a representative of power and a spiritual life force. And we still see some religions that harbor a degree of this, that have been long-standing belief systems that have value and provide purpose in life. The third group is what's known as theism, and there's two versions of it. Theism is the belief in God or gods. Monotheism is the single supreme being or God that can impact all things, including creation of earth. So things like Christianity, Judaism, Islam fall under one God, or monotheism. Polytheism, on the other hand, is more than one God. The Shinto and other indigenous religions of Africa often have, and as you can see, Egyptian gods had multiple gods. And then the fourth category is non-theistic. This is the belief in divine spiritual forces such as the sacred principles of thought and conduct rather than the good or the gods. Principles of truth, justice, affirmation of life, tolerance of others are all available for you to achieve your own true potential. Now, what we're going to move into will be to look at, now we'll start with sociological perspectives on religion. This is looking at the theories. And we'll begin with functionalists. Now, the religion, from a functionalist perspective, is essential to the maintenance of society, and that's based on Durkheim's work. It's a cultural universal. And so the function is to bind people together. Now remember, functionalists look at the function of different aspects of society. And, excuse me, the beliefs and rituals are collective representatives. They're group-held meanings that express something important about the group itself. Now, there are some very basic functions but they're major functions of religion. The first is that the meaning and purpose in life. So religion provides, some meaning and purpose in life, so it's less confusing. Religion gives meaning to problems like life, death, suffering, tragedies, famine, economic depression, and offer hope in the afterlife. Secondly, is social cohesion and a sense of belonging. Shared experience and strengthen not only the group, but also the individual's commitment to the group. And then lastly, or third, is social control and the support of the government. Social control comes from conferring supernatural legitimacy from the norms and laws in the society. And so from functionalist perspective, religion plays a function in the successful instability, if you will, and the success of a society. Now, as an alternative, conflict, which is another set of glasses looking at society differently than functionalists do, its ideologies are a systematic view of the way the world ought to be, are embodied in religious doctrines and political values. And so the main theme of conflict is that religion has three functions. The first function is that of supporting the status quo. Don't upset the apple cart. Remember, conflict is based on there's the haves and have-nots. And those that have don't want the apple cart upset. Maintain the status quo. Secondly, is that because of this unequalness, one of the things that religion's done is causes alienation. It keeps people separate from the larger group, and so religion can sort of maintain that. And then thirdly, it offers legitimacy to the ruling class. That it's used, if you will, by the ruling class in such a manner as to sort of justify what they do and offers this legitimacy of the ruling class. Now there are types of conflict. It tends to promote strife between groups, Jews versus Muslims in Israel and Palestine. It also between groups of a larger society. We see the Protestants and the Catholics in the past within Ireland. And so some of what conflict theory is that it produces this or promotes this tendency towards disagreement between religious groups. And as far as the rich are concerned, that's satisfactory. That keeps the status quo from their perspective. Now, Max Weber had a response to Marx where he said that, in his study that was entitled The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, where essentially Weber, like Marx, saw religion also as a source of social control that was used by the elites to accomplish their secular agenda. And now if you follow much of what's going on in the United States, there's a segment of the population that is supporting that perspective, if you will, in terms of what Trump's doing, in terms of the focusing on some of the religious components and using that to justify some of the agenda. So let's move along to another theorist, the Symbolic Interactionist. And again, I'm going to emphasize, Symbolic Interactionists are micro. Unlike Functionalism, Conflict, Postmodern, and Feminism, which are macro, they look at the big world and look at the big scenario, the big picture, if you will. Symbolic Interactionists look at the face-to-face, the micro level. And they look at how religion gives meaning to everyday life. And they see there's two dimensions. Excuse me. One is religion as a reference group. This essentially means that it helps people to define themselves. By the way we associate with whom we share religious experiences with, it helps define who we are based on who we associate with. And secondly, in this sort of reference group, is that religious symbols express the essential facts of our human existence. when people get together and share expressions and share dialogue about the symbols, about the religious experience, it binds them together and they have that shared understanding. Now, part of what the interactionalist perspective wanted to figure out, and you'll find this on page 374, 375, is religious conversion. What happens? Why do people leave one religion and sort of move into another, particularly these outside the norm religions? And so they did some research based on John Leffland's research as to why people would convert to non-traditional religious movements like the Moonies. Now, this is the seventh stage of what he felt needed. What would happen. This is Sun Myung Moon. He's the one who heads up what is loosely known as the Moonies. And these seven stages of a person would need to have some sort of sense of loss or increased tension. Secondly, there needs to be sort of an ability and a willingness to adopt a sacred strategy. Thirdly, that the person would have a current commitment that is not life-giving, that whatever you're currently believing in is not stopping those things in your life that you wish weren't happening anymore. And then fourth, they meet someone from a new group, and this is where Moonies would go out and try to recruit, and then begins to form a bond with that new group, sever bonds with the old group, and then 7 is total identity with the new group. And if you go on Google and Google image, and if you Google image Moonies, you'll see these mass marriages done in football stadiums, soccer stadiums in Europe and in North America. And this is an example of groups having been converted, if you will, going through these religious conversions. It's quite a powerful, but it's done on a face-to-face basis, and this is why it's explained through symbolic interactionalism. Now we'll move into feminism. Now remember, feminism is somewhat based on conflict. It looks at inequities, but rather than the global inequities between the rich and the poor, it magnifies that to include and have as a primary focus the gender inequality between men and women. And they would describe it as his religion / her religion. Excuse me. And this is where in most religions, women have much less influence than men. Men hold superior positions. Gender experiences of the sacred vary. Some beliefs see male deities over minor female deities. You see this in Greek myths. The use of exclusive language tends to be a problem, and images of God as male or female. So they look at this as being another way, if you will, of suppressing women as opposed to glorifying or at least equalizing women. So women in the ministry, there's an irony. Research shows that women are more likely to be members of religious organizations, but less likely to be in positions of authority. More and more churches are ordaining women. And then lastly, we're going to look at the postmodern. Now, postmodern, this is the world becoming more secular, more religious, or more sacred? Is religion dying? These are the questions of the secularization debate that postmodern posts. As modernization progresses, does religion decline? Now, secularization is a process wherein the sacred and its institutional extensions is either marginalized in sociological or psychological ways or diminished by the secular. So Marx, Weber, and Durkheim predicted the gradual decline of religion in the modern world, and their evidence was, in Canada and in Western and Eastern Europe, fewer and fewer people claim to be active Christians, and many Muslims in Iran do not practice their religion. So is religion declining? Well, we don't know. It seems to be some evidence to suggest that it was or is. The counter evidence would be that most Muslim countries are religious. The United States is still very much religious. resurgence of religion in the former Soviet Union, and Christianity is growing rapidly in Africa and China. So who's correct? Both versions provide some degree of evidence, but why? When cultures are threatened, religion is a source of strength. Militant Islam is an example of this. Many in third world suffer from poverty and turn to religion for meaning. And so it really leaves open as to, well, it's hard to determine what's going to happen in the future regarding religion. There's evidence on both sides. So now let's move into trends. So let's look at trends in religion in Canada. And we can begin with some of the religious mosaic in Canada, the patterns that exist. And in early Canada, when the Roman Catholic Church dominated Quebec and the Church of England dominated Upper Canada, there has been an increased diversity since then. You're looking here as in 2001, looking at religious diversity in Canada. Now this has changed certainly to some degree, probably not as much as you may think. The one area that has grown probably as much, if not more than anything else, is people expressing no affiliation or no religion. Some of the changes, the single most important change has been the affiliation of non-affiliation. And it's hard to explain why there's been somewhat of a leaving of affiliated religious groups. We look at this one here and we see religious affiliations in Canada, and you can see where no religion has been increasing over some time. And you find both of these charts in your textbook. Now these are from 2000, 2001. Up to 2003, I believe this was released. And you might begin to wonder, how have things been changing? You can look at the increase in immigration from countries that are not usual for Canada. It started out, immigration was European, then it went into South Asia, China and Japan and Philippines, and now we find a greater number coming in from Muslim-based countries. And you might say, well, then must be that the Muslim group is growing. Not as rapidly as you think. It's oftentimes what we read and how we get affected by what we read, less about what the data says. Now, fundamentalism, this is where conservative religious doctrine that opposes intellectualism and worldly accommodation. So this is where we believe in our beliefs, and we don't believe in science. We don't believe in the dialogue on intellectual basis and other evidence that's contrary, and instead they favor of restoring the traditional otherworldly focus. Some respond to secular humanism, which is a belief in the perfectibility of human beings through their own efforts rather than a belief in God. Excuse me. Some of the examples historically have been the genesis of the Social Credit Party in Alberta in the 1930s. The New Religious Right in the U.S., this is also known as the Tea Party, the Muslim fundamentalist group of Al-Qaeda, and parents convincing a school board from having Harry Potter books in the classroom are all examples of fundamentalism. In the States, you find a very significant group of people, of fundamentalists in religion called creationists. They have a belief that the world is only 6,000 years old, and it's literally based on the Bible, and nothing existed before that. So if we start to move on forward and look at the future, it's hard to determine what's going to happen. Influence of religion will continue beyond those active in their religion. Even if you move away from religion, religion doesn't disappear. The fear, of course, for many people is the rise of an Islamic fundamentalism, but it's not only Islamic, it's the one that's receiving a lot of attention now. The creationist fundamentalists in the States are just as worthy of our fear, if you will, than are other fundamentalist groups. Religion may or may not unite, but divide people in the future. It can be a uniting factor and it can be a dividing factor, as we've seen through history. The new role of religious schools and what they may have as an impact on the future. The rise of religious nationalism, especially in the Middle East. Statistics Canada does show an increase in Judeo-Christian tradition, but their numbers are small. And so what we can't predict is, where will religion be in 50 years? Like a lot of issues, it's hard to predict because the data is often moving, and because this world is getting more globalized and we are interacting with more people, we find it more and more difficult to be able to predict where will things be in the future if world events change or stay the same. I hope you have found this useful. I'm sorry we can't go into more depth on some of these topics. They would be interesting, but those are separate sociological studies, and maybe that's something you could pursue in the future. Well, good luck everybody, and carry on the good work. Bye now.